At the time of filming this video, I haven't created a single thing in over a month, and I was finding myself getting further and further away from wanting to be creative. So I decided to force myself to create. It didn't matter what it was. And I tried something new, hoping it would turn out, and it actually sparked my creativity all over again. Today, I'm going to bring you along the process of how I created this card and share this simple technique with you. So let's get into it. I'm starting off with a piece of Kraft Distress Heavystock. I'm going to spritz the cardstock with a little bit of water, and then I'm going to take several different distress mica stains, and I'm going to spray them and splatter them on the cardstock. If you don't own any mica stains, don't worry. You can do the embossing folder technique that I'm going to show later on in this video with backgrounds that you created with regular distress sprays or ink blended backgrounds. The options are endless. I do want to encourage you to use what you have on hand. When I'm using sprays, I usually go from lightest to darkest to build up that depth on the project. But for this background, I'm using the color that I want most to show up, and then adding a little bit of green and yellow here and there because I don't want too much of that on my project. Another tip I have for you is spray a little bit at a time. Don't focus on covering the whole background at once because you can always add more color like I'm doing here, and it's definitely harder to take away the color, especially with these mica stains. If you're not comfortable spraying the sprays, you can take the nozzle out of the bottle, use a paintbrush to paint on the mica stains, or you can even use the nozzle to splatter it on the cardstock. I'm tilting the background side to side and back and forth so that I can get all of that color moving around. Once I like how it looks, I'm going to dry the background completely. As you could see, I have a lot of excess spray on my mat, and what I'm doing here is I'm spraying some Distress Heavystock with a little bit of water, and I'm going to pick up all of that color that's on my mat. I'll save this background for future projects. I talked about adding layers to the background earlier in the video. That's what I'm doing here. I splattered on a little bit of water, and I forgot that once the background is dry with the mica stains, they don't like to react with water. So I decided to splatter on some more of that color. If you're curious about any of the supplies that I used today, you can find the full supply list in the description box below. But I do want to encourage you to use what you have on hand. Once I have enough splatters on the background, I'm going to spritz it with a little bit of water. I set that aside to dry, and I'm going to be moving on to the embossing folder technique. If I'm being completely honest, I had no idea how the Archival ink and the mica stains were going to react to each other, but I wanted to give it a try. So I added some black soot Archival ink to my embossing folder, and I spritzed it with a little bit of water. I closed the embossing folder and ran it through my die cut machine. And when I opened the embossing folder, I was really surprised that the Archival ink did exactly what I wanted it to. It darkened the debossed areas and helped make all of the details on the embossing folder show up more. I'm going to be adding some Distress Microglaze on top of the background, and I like to use a dome blending tool, and you don't need a lot at all. A little bit goes a long way. It just helps seal the background, and it helps brighten everything up. I'm now going to be adding some Foundry wax onto my background, and I do this by adding a little bit of the wax onto my glass mat. And then I use a paintbrush to pick up the wax, and then I'm going to splatter it on the background. You can do as many or as little splatters as you want, and most of you know I always go heavy-handed on the splatters because I don't think there can ever be enough, but if splatters aren't your thing, you definitely do not have to add them to your background. These waxes are different from any other waxes that I've used before because you actually have to heat set them. Once you start adding heat to the wax, you could see it brightens them up and it's going to set them and make them permanent. You can see the difference between where I added the heat and where I haven't. I wanted to keep this card simple because I really wanted that background to stand out. I added a quick sentiment that says thank you, and to finish off the card, I used a Pink Fresh Studio die cut and I added some of that Foundry wax to it. I really enjoyed getting out all of my supplies and creating something. So if you're finding yourself in a creative rut, be sure to check out this playlist right here where I share lots of inspiration and tips and techniques to help you get started. I'll see you there.